I want to start tonight's podcast talking about do-overs. Who doesn't love a do-over? A chance to do something again, either right or possibly better. We need do-overs in life, in love, in work. You do something at work and maybe it was okay. Can I get a shot at doing it over? Sure, why not? In love, how many people have said, I'll never love again, and yet they get another shot at it. They get to do it over. In love, in marriage, second marriages, third marriages. I know somebody who's been married 4 times. I call that the I do over and over again until I get it right. We need them. You go on a golf scramble with your friends, right? You don't like your shot? You call a mulligan. You get to do it over. Try again. Hit it a little better. New Year's resolutions, a chance to do everything over, bigger, and better. Sometimes you succeed. Sometimes you fail. The important word in the do-over, though, my friends, is do. You gotta do it, or it ain't gonna get done. Hi, I'm Dino Tripodis, and welcome to Whiskey Business, a podcast not so much about whiskey as it is one with whiskey. Our guest bottles tonight are 2 magnificent Irish whiskeys, which I know nothing about because they were brought by our guest, who is kind of a do-over. Not that we need to improve upon his last podcast. His last podcast was great, but what I realized in that last podcast is there was so much more left on the table at that time that we never got a chance to get into. So we'll get to our guest here in just a moment, but he brought us Powers Single Pot Still Irish Whiskey, the 3 swallow release. Know nothing about it. Also the Jameson Cooper's Croze. I know nothing about it, but he does. And we'll get to that in just a second. Speaking of do-overs, I'm horrible at this thing that we call social media. Thank God I have 2 excellent producers on this show, John Whitney, who does our video for the YouTube channel, and Greg Hansberry, who handles all the other stuff. So Hansberry, we said that starting at the beginning of these podcasts, we would tell people up front about what they should look for and what they should do before we actually get into the meat of
get the business out of the way.
Get the business out of the way, if you will.
Well, because whiskey business is everywhere.
It is.
We want you to subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. Rate and review us if you follow us on iTunes. We love that. Like us on Facebook.
Why not?
Yeah. Find us on Instagram, Whiskey Business Podcast.
I like
a lot
Instagram.
of fun photographs, right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Check us out on Twitter at Whiskey Biz Show. Whiskey
Yes.
B-I-Z Show.
We just added that handle to our Twitter account.
And
Yes,
did
we
you know that Whiskey Business is on YouTube?
I think I just mentioned that we have an excellent producer who does that for
He
us,
is
John Whitney.
Well, and the cool thing about it is all the unedited shows are
right.
on there.
Yeah.
So all of the nonsense that I clean up and crop out,
Yeah.
you can find on YouTube.
You can find the raw, ugly stuff as well.
Exactly. Plus bonus behind the bottle shorts.
Which we're
All
going to
right.
start doing more of.
So that's on YouTube, Whiskey Business with Dino Tripodis.
Nice.
Plus, finally, share with your friends the grassroots effort of us whiskey-loving nuts.
Which has actually worked. I think we've increased our listenership and subscribers, so we thank you for that. And moving forward, we hope to get even more of you on board the whiskey business bus. I mentioned the guest bottles. Our guest is Barry Chandler, who I met and talked to on our podcast earlier when we talked about your business, Story Forge, which was a unique kind of twist on marketing a company. You actually get down into the identities and the nitty-gritty of what that company's all about. And it was an interesting, we talked about that a little bit, and we're not going to talk about that in any type of length tonight because we did that. You can go back and listen to that podcast. It's a really fascinating story. But we got into some of Barry's history in that podcast as well, but left so much on the table as far as I'm concerned. And then after that, you started to pop up as Irish Barry,
Irish Whiskey Barry,
Irish
yeah.
Whiskey Barry on Instagram, which I find interesting because in some text back and forth to each other while we were preparing and trying to get you in on this podcast for this St. Paddy's week podcast, you mentioned I don't like stereotypes, and then I thought I had offended him at first because I made like a joke saying like it was hard to get an Irishman on the month of March for a podcast, and he writes back, I don't like stereotypes. I'm like, oh, did I offend him? And then I go, wait a minute. He's Irish Whiskey Barry on Instagram. So explain that. Is it not a stereotype if you exploit it yourself?
I mean, exploiting is a big word. I think aligning with my lineage and my history. So I think it's obvious what I do by the Instagram handle. I talk about Irish whiskey. I introduce people to Irish whiskey. My name is Barry, and I think it cuts through the clutter very quickly.
Mm-hmm. It does a good job, and and that has just kind of exploded. I mean, you have your regular business, like we said, Story Forge.
Right.
Has this introducing people to whiskey and
so this is my night job.
Your night job.
When I come home from Story Forge, I work on the whiskey side of the business, which is called Stories and Sips, and I help introduce people to the whiskeys through tastings and through videos and my podcast. To try and build an emotional connection with Ireland and its whiskeys.
It seems to be taking up a lot of your time.
I'd like it to take up more of my time. Actually, I really enjoy it. It's I feel like I've been here in the US 12 years, and it's the first time I felt super connected to Ireland again. So it's like a bridge back to where I came from.
So this was actually a tool to kind of reconnect yourself to
subconsciously. I think. I didn't realize it until suddenly I realized. Oh, yeah.
Well, we're going to dig into you, the man, but first let's talk about. Let's actually do some sips and stories right here, and tell us because.
I forget which one we have.
We sometimes get away from the fact that the part of the whiskey business
is the whiskey.
One of the things is the only running theme on this podcast is not so much a podcast about whiskey as it is one with whiskey. And congratulations, with these two bottles, you now mark our 79th and 80th bottle. Different bottle on the pod. We've never repeated a bottle on the podcast.
I was trying to figure out what might you not have tasted, and I looked through my shelf of whiskeys, opened and unopened, and I looked at these two and I said, there's a good chance they haven't had these two.
You scored well, my friend.
Okay, good.
So what are we drinking right now? First of all, tell us about the glass that we're drinking out of.
So this is a unique glass. It is called the Toaglass, Tuath, but you pronounce it like Tua, Tua. And Tua is the old Irish word for nation or family. And this is a glass designed specifically for Irish whiskey. So Scotland has their Glencairn glass. Bourbon has its, bucket. But Irish whiskey has its Tua glass.
It's Tua.
We don't even need a glass. It's a bottle.
And you mentioned something that it's designed on the bottom like this so you can actually hold it.
You can hold it. Yep. It's got a stem, and it can also be leaned on its side. So you could rest it on the table and pour your like a regular measure in there. We've poured a hefty measure in ours, so we can't really do it.
Hefty.
But it's big enough to taste, but also to drink it. So some glasses are too small to drink. They're just for sipping and tasting.
Right.
But you can do both here. And there's a wide rim at the top to let some of the alcohol vapors go past you so the ethanol isn't knocking you out immediately. Mm-hmm. So it's good for nosing.
And this is, which one are we drinking first?
So we're drinking here, we've got the Powers. Single pot still, 3 swallow release. Very new to the United States.
When I was had the pleasure of being at your home, I recalled having a Powers as well.
You did. You had Powers John's Lane, which is their flagship brand.
Yeah.
And this came in. This is now the most affordable pot still Irish whiskey in America. Very affordable. Powers is one of the oldest brands in the world, or oldest Irish whiskey brands in the world. Very storied. And what you have here is a mixture of malted and unmalted barley. That's Ireland's signature type of whiskey, is single pot still.
That's good.
You think it's hot?
I think so.
I think it's pretty smooth, actually.
I'm smelling caramel, toffee. Once you let it sit for a while, swirl it around, you're getting some of the ethanol, certainly, but I get chocolate.
My 2 cents real quick is I went to the Jameson distillery back in the day and tried all the things, but I like the John Powers out of all of their their labels. That's one I like the best.
It's a very special whiskey. In Ireland, growing up, you either had Powers in your cabinet or Jameson or Paddy whiskey. I know we drank Paddy on the last podcast.
We had Paddy. We had Paddy on the podcast.
We were a Powers house. I remember the sound of that bottle opening, that pop of the cork. That's a familiar sound to me.
That's one of my favorite sounds in the world, whether it's an Irish whiskey or a Kentucky bourbon or a single malt Scotch. When that pop comes out of the bottle, I can't I can't. Yeah, it's not even. It's that new pop.
It's the Irish mating call. Yeah.
So we'll come a running. So what is this? This will be available. It's
available in Ohio right now. It's only been here a few weeks in Columbus. It was in Cleveland before that, and only in the last year has it come to the United States. This is most Irish whiskies you'll find are bottled at 80 proof or 40% ABV. This is slightly higher. And most of the Irish are annoyed at this because in Ireland this is served at 80 proof, but here it's 86.4 proof, a little bit higher because in Ireland for every percentage you go up above 40, there's an extra $1 or euro or €2 added to the retail price.
Oh,
so
really?
excise, so it's very rare to see anything above 80 proof in Ireland for whiskies.
Which is weird that I say it's hot because I mean bourbon's 90, pretty basically.
You've had some
really
hot
but I guess it just stings.
You weren't expecting
it to
be Irish?
I like it.
That's a lovely ABV, that 43.
Yeah.
It's just, for me, it's perfect. Yeah.
So the people in Ireland are pissed that we've got the higher proof and
they
paying
can't
less
get it.
and paying less for it.
That's right. That's right.
What's that retail for, do you think?
This retails for $44.
Oh, that's our favorite. Anything under
Very
50 bucks a bottle.
Very
we
affordable.
Love it. We love it.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's very nice.
And so there's a great story to Three Swallows. You'll see on the bottle there's Three Swallows embossed there.
Yeah.
So this, for 200 years, the Three Swallows have represented the Powers brand. And for many years, nobody knew why. They couldn't find it in the annals of history anywhere. Why? What had the Swallows got to do with anything? Well, 7 years ago, the Jameson distillery hired their first historian, their first archivist. And she found, through the old books of John Power in Dublin, she found reference to it. And what it actually refers to is a fascinating story. So the Powers family, very wealthy in Dublin, not only did they make great whiskey, but they were known for having the best horses and the best carriages in Dublin. And they stored them and kept them at the distillery. So if the Powers family wanted to go anywhere, they would call for these horsemen and these carriages. Well, each carriage had 3 horsemen on it. It had 1 at the front and 2 at the back. And if they went out in the middle of the winter or in the middle of the night, it would be cold. So each man was given a small little bottle, a small little measure of Powers to take with him so that he could drink it and stay warm. And there was only enough in the bottle to keep him warm, but also to still do the job.
Not drunk.
One swallow in each bottle.
Oh, wow.
So three swallows on the carriage, which is a fascinating story for
a great story.
history. And they've maintained that up to today, this embossing, which is a nice little touch.
You need more than one swallow to keep
Let's say,
you
let's
warm.
not institute that
let's
rule
not
on the
limit ourselves.
podcast,
You
please.
need more than one swallow to keep you warm.
Many of the bottles were embossed back in the day because the Irish couldn't read. Like in the 1700s, 1800s, literacy was a problem. So they came in and they looked and they saw maybe a symbol, and the 3 swallows to them represented a certain age of whiskey, and Powers also had 2 swallows, and that represented a younger whiskey. So the Irish didn't have to read; they just need to identify how many swallows were there to get their whiskey.
That still works today.
Because didn't you say that about just even the size and shape of the bottle too? At some point, had something to do with that
that's
too.
right.
I remember
so
you
they could
bringing that up
recognize
before.
it for sure.
It's very good. It's very, very good.
So that's a pot still whiskey compared to the blend, which is the next one. A lot of Jameson's a blend.
Well, let's enjoy this for a second.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple of Barry questions.
Please.
How old were you when you had your first taste of whiskey?
I was 18.
18.
Yeah.
It took you that long.
Yeah.
Now living in Ireland,
I know.
you were 8. It took you to 18.
13 years longer than most of my friends.
I was going to say, yeah. Why the delay?
I wasn't a young drinker. I never took to drinking very young. But when I remember I started working in a hotel when I was 18, and I saw a bottle on the shelf that had the distiller's signature on it. It was called Middleton Very Rare, and it had the signature of Barry Crockett. He was the distiller. And I was fascinated by this because it was the most expensive bottle in the hotel, and it was over £100, which is about $200. And I was wondering, what's in this bottle? How can it be so much? And I started to learn about the history of it. And I was making not very much money at the time, but I saved up my money, and I went on a trip with some friends, and I bought a measure of this whiskey. And it was the first whiskey I'd ever tasted, first Irish whiskey I'd ever tasted. And I still remember the bartender taking it off the shelf and then putting the bottle down, and he put the glass beside it, and he could see my eyes were wide open. And as he poured it, he looked at me and he said, "That'll be like a candlelit procession going down your throat." and I sipped it and I thought, oh, that's amazing. And I know what I was wearing that day. The taste, every time I taste Middleton, I go back to that one moment in Galway, the west coast of Ireland.
Like a candlelit procession going down your throat. That's poetry. That's poetry. That always amazes me about when we leave the country, when we leave the United States of America, and we go out of the country into Europe, and other amazing. The fact that people just spew that shit out so naturally, that doesn't happen in America. You would not go into a bar and order a fine Kentucky bourbon and have someone say, "Yeah, that's going to go down your throat like a candlelight procession." I don't know. I heard some Irish guy say something, but
isn't that what makes us unique? Isn't it?
It's because I remember one time when I was in Greece, and for sad reasons, my father was dying, and I was in a cafe, and a friend of his came up to me and sat down, and he asked me, "How's your father?" And I go, "He's not doing well," and then he said, "It's a sorrowful glass. Best to drink it in one gulp." And he said that just
profoundly
simple, and naturally,
yeah.
just out of his mouth. I'm like, wow,
yeah,
poetry.
Right.
It affected me.
Yeah,
and then I tried to talk that way when I came back to America, and I completely fucked it up.
It was beaten out here.
I couldn't say it. I couldn't do it. But 18 years of age.
18 years of age.
And then you're on your way.
And the whiskey was older than me. I mean, the whiskey would have been at least 20 years of age. So my first whiskey was older than me, which is it's been downhill since then.
Yeah. So you're growing up with your friends. Are they drinking and you're not? And then when they say Barry,
whiskey, it would have been very rare to drink whiskey at that age. It was beer. It was Heineken, it was Guinness, but it wouldn't have been whiskey. Whiskey would have been an old man's drink when I was growing up. There were very few distilleries in Ireland when I was growing up. There was only 3, and that was the case for a long time. So whiskey was just an old man's drink predominantly. Okay,
so then once again, let's bust up the stereotype. Everybody assumes that if you're from Ireland, you were drinking that you were, knee high.
Right.
And that's not the case.
Yeah, no, it's not the case. And I think
so. You were drinking beer.
I never took to beer. I always thought it was a waste of barley. But I started drinking.
Did you smoke? 18. Did you do drugs? What did you do until you were 18
Did you not enjoy yourself, Barry?
How did you have fun?
They had
you got
too,
laid a lot.
guess.
Tell me you got laid a lot.
This is going to be a very sad podcast.
We went to church. Were you an altar boy?
I was an altar boy. Yeah.
Wine. There's wine.
I didn't drink the wine. No,
of course not. No.
I'm sure I made up for it in later life. Now I've got more whiskey than I know what to do with.
Is that really ever a problem? More whiskey than I know what to do with.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, people say that all the time when they come and visit here. They walk around and like, wow.
You got everywhere I look. There's brown water.
There's something. There's something everywhere. Yeah. Well, we always say that this house is just a liquor license away from being one of the better bars in Columbus. If that's the case. Now, for you personally, when you find out the history. And I know you love the history.
Yeah.
You do that in Sips and Stories, and you're so wonderfully eloquent and so sincerely involved in telling the tales of this. Does that enhance the taste for you? Does that
100%?
Yeah,
100%.
Knowing something extra about the whiskey, does that bring more to it?
Look, we all want to fall in love. We all want to connect. We all want to bond. I'm bonding with generations of craftsmen and artisans who've put together this whiskey, and knowing that these are now distilled 12 miles from my house in a distillery where I grew up, 12 miles from where I grew up, in a distillery that's hundreds of years old.
I apologize, I forgot to turn that off.
That's all right.
Yes, I have a landline.
And also, you can, why don't you answer it on our YouTube channel, which is unedited, archived videos.
So
of all this nonsense.
By
the way, who the hell has a landline?
I have a
Who's got a landline, for Christ's sake?
I have not one, but 2.
Get out of here.
2 landlines. 2 landlines.
Well, you go take that call. We'll just drink whiskey.
I'm going to pause for just 1 second and turn off the landline. And we'll be right back with more of Barry Chandler.
They will never know. The audio podcast will never know.
No, they won't. That's your magic.
As we start. I love it.
So Barry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. This is the first. There it is.
My wife just found out that she's like 18% Irish.
Okay.
She was adopted, so she had no idea.
Ah.
Yeah.
So she wants to go to Ireland. What's the best place to go in Ireland if you were a newbie to Ireland?
Well, I want to know a little bit more about what she likes to do, and does she like to eat or drink?
She likes to eat and drink, yeah.
Okay. It's important to keep you alive. I think she should go to Cork in the south coast.
Aha.
And I think she should go to the southwest, to Dingle, to the Dingle Peninsula.
Oh, did you steal one of my questions?
No, I told her my wife's just found out.
That's a loaded question. The Dingle Peninsula, here in America, that's right. It's just kind of like a euphemism for
Dingle.
penis.
Dingle? Dingle dangle, dingle dongle. Yeah.
Specifically peninsula.
So Dingletown.
The Dingle Peninsula
is one of the most beautiful things that jut out of Ireland.
Exactly.
Do we need to clap again or just still rolling? So how often do you get back to Ireland?
3-4 times a year, maybe.
On purpose?
I don't go against my will. I'm not dragged there.
I'm saying, because I have to go to Florida 2 or 3 times a year.
Right.
Because my mother's there.
Okay.
And when I say I have to,
sure.
I'm saying it's an unspoken thing. I must go to Florida. Now, granted, I enjoy it and I love seeing my mother.
Right.
But do you feel the pull to go back? Is that why?
I think the last 18 months as I've gotten more back into whiskey, I've gone back for more reasons than just family. I've gone to either shoot episodes or I've gone to visit distilleries or I've made new friends through the whiskey community online. That's been a big source of joy for me. So I get to do that and see my family as well. But now, the last time I went home, they got tacked on to the last day or two of a 2-week visit. First 12 days were whiskey distilleries, and then they got squeezed in on the last 48 hours. But
so you're just having a blast.
I mean, life's short.
Is it?
It is, I think.
Is it? Is life short?
I think life's short. I mean, there's so much to do and see. Can you squeeze it all in, realistically? Should we even sleep at night? We're trying to squeeze it all in.
Trust me, you're talking to somebody who's been sleep deprived most of his life. I think I've squeezed a lot out. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 40.
40.
Yeah.
I remember 40. I will be.
I'm on the back 9.
No, don't say that.
Round in the corner.
I'm going to be 60.
You are not.
In April.
You don't look it.
Well, God bless you. Thank you. I'm pickled. I'm preserved. I'm well preserved.
You got a copper liver, is it?
So it's interesting to hear your perspective about, life is short at 40. Do you feel like, because I feel sometimes like 60's not bothering me.
Yeah.
But I am aware of the fact that how many quality years might actually be left,
I'm getting more and more aware of my time and more wary of where I spend my time. Mm-hmm. Even if something's going to take a day, I take a little bit of time to consider, is that a good day? Is that a day well spent?
Right.
Because there's so many other things I want to do. Will that thing get me closer to the things I want to do, or does it just take me away?
Do you question your mortality and worry about it? Do you obsess over it?
No, I don't obsess over it. I'm aware of it.
I know some people that since they were 20 years of age, and I hear people thinking, oh man, I'm 30.
Yeah.
My life's over. Hansberry.
I'm fucked.
But and I probably don't help matters with this, but
I don't know. There's a lot to see and a lot to do, and I'd rather. I don't want to regret anything on the deathbed. The number one response from people is that they spent too much time at the office. They think they regret. That they would have done more with their family or traveled, and why not do that now? I see a lot of people waiting till they're retired to do the things they want to do. But what if you don't have your health when you're retired, or what if you don't make it that far?
But if you don't do it now, then when?
Yeah.
And do you think thus far at 40 you've lived your life the way you want to?
Yeah. I have. Yeah.
When did you start to?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but don't you like traveled the world on a cruise ship for a while?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I spent 4 years on ships. I've circled the globe twice, and I think I've visited 80 countries. But I've got more to do. Like now there's quality things to do. Like now that I found like a nice whiskey, can I just sit and ponder the world with a whiskey in my hand?
And what do you ponder when you ponder?
I could ponder a puddle. I could look at a puddle and just ponder it. I like headspace. I want to think about things. I want to ask why, and that gives me great joy. It's the Irish. We like to think, maybe sometimes too much, but a glass in our hand, and maybe not too many glasses in our hand, but just one or two in our hands and thinking. It's a nice thing.
I'm curious if by doing sips and stories, which you're
stories
doing,
and sips.
Stories and sips. Sorry, if you're doing stories and sips, has that also transferred over into what you do with Story Forge? I mean, are you able to apply principles to both, and consequently make Stories and Sips a little better because of what you've done at Story Forge?
Absolutely, yeah.
And also bring a little bit of that from Stories and Sips to Storyforge and make those presentations
100%
that much more
100%.
effective.
Look,
so they complement
one another. Look, I think the Irish we have some level of storytelling ability in Ireland, and whether I'm doing it with whiskey or doing it with businesses, I'm hopefully sharing a story that helps them achieve something, whether it's a goal or get somebody introduced to whiskey or Ireland. It's just storytelling. How I'm just spinning the coin, in a different direction.
Does the accent help?
It does. Without it, I've got nothing. Like, let's be honest. They'll discover I know nothing.
Would Stories and Sips be nearly as engaging if I was narrating it? I don't think so.
Well, I was asked to do a whiskey tasting, or I was asked to participate in a Irish whiskey tasting coming up to St. Patrick's Day, and I was asked if I'd attend it, and I asked what it meant by attending, and they said, well, this whiskey company asked if I'd sit in the audience and listen to an American teach me about Irish whiskey. And I said,
no.
The week of St. Patrick's Day, no bigger insult could an Irishman be served than to sit there, let the man with the accent and a few whiskeys under his belt lead that class instead. And I managed to get them to change their mind.
I've addressed this in previous St. Paddy's podcasts before, but why so huge here and kind of it's not that big a deal over there
because
as it is here.
There's more Irish here than there is in Ireland. And there's more of a romantic, nostalgic look in Ireland here than there is in Ireland itself. So you've got 80 million Irish around the world claiming Irish heritage, whether they're in China or in the United States. And I think there's something about belonging, something about being part of something. And if you're, America's just made up of, it's just such a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds that everyone's holding on to something. The Italians, the Greeks, the Irish.
Sure. And
they hold on to, from my observation, it's maybe more of a nostalgic view of the thing than the thing itself. And often the Irish Americans are disappointed when they go to Ireland and they see we have roads and televisions and the internet, and they're wondering where are all the thatched cottages and the men talking to cows on the side of the road,
They're waiting for it. They want to go wherever John Wayne was.
That's
right.
The
quiet man.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the romantic. I do.
Well, you can go there, but you just have to go back to 1952 to get there.
That's fine. That's fine because I've never been to Ireland, and I do romanticize about it a little bit. If I were to go, I'd want to go into one of those little pubs.
So those places still exist. There's nooks. There's little outposts of old Ireland, but authentic old Ireland, not the made up maybe what I would call the Hollywood Ireland, that's fantasized about in movies. But there is authentic Ireland. You go on the West Coast, the rugged coastline of the West Coast, being hammered by the Atlantic Ocean and winds for thousands of years. There you'll find a random pub in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, there you go.
Where you wander in there and you mightn't leave for days. You mightn't have had a sandwich or anything to eat in those 3 days, but you'll be fine. You had a few whiskeys, a few Guinness, you told stories, you laughed, you joked. That's living.
Do they like us over there?
Ah, yeah.
Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, the Americans are very welcome. Yeah, always have been. Yeah, always have been. Yep. I mean, when we see you coming, we flip the prices. We give you American pricing applies.
I would expect nothing less. I would expect nothing.
No, the Americans have been very
some
good.
Coca-Cola.
So my mother remembers her aunt who emigrated from Ireland. Her aunt would send home what was called the American package. Every year around Christmas, there'd be a box would come home with American things. And back in 1950s, 1960s Ireland, to see such things you could never have seen the likes of in Ireland, little dresses or candy or just something American, that would have been so out of reach to the Irish. So there's a rich history. Look, we've been sending people over there for years. You've been coming back. It's a lovely virtuous circle that just keeps going around and around.
It's an interesting story because I remember when we moved to Greece when I was 9 years of age, and we moved to the island that my father was born on.
What island was that?
Icaria.
Okay.
Icaria.
Ah, yeah.
One of the blue zones, if you're familiar with the blue zones. You're not familiar with the blue zones? The blue zones are different parts of the are different parts of the world.
The red zones? I don't know.
No, blue zones.
I know the red zone.
Blue zones are
really well.
are pockets of the world where people have an incredibly long lifespan, longevity. They live to be in their 90s because of the diet and the way of life, and how they approach things. And Icaria is one of the blue zones where people live well into their 90s. There was a story I remember in the New York Times Magazine where a Greek gentleman was diagnosed with cancer and 6 months to live, and he said, if I only have 6 months to live, I'm going to go back to the island. And he went back to Icaria where his parents were still living. And over the course of those 6 months, he started to adapt to the diet that they had, and also to the way of life. And after 6 months, he was still alive.
Wow.
A year later, he was still alive. 3 years later, still alive. Eventually, cancer gone.
Amazing.
And he goes back to the States for a visit and looks up his doctor, which he can't find because he's dead. So yeah, there's something to it. But my point being, when I went there at 9 years of age, I had brought things back I brought things from America with me that they were, the other kids that I got, they were just fascinated with, and American comic books and board games and American music, and it was like I was bringing this whole different culture to the island in 1969 that they were completely unaware of.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I wouldn't underestimate the impact America has had on the world and culturally how it's impacted, and it's given people something to aspire to for many generations too. America was always held up as that thing if you were lucky, you would get there someday.
Right. I mean, once again, I go back to the cinematic version of people getting on boats and coming to America,
Titanic,
the Irish and the Italians, and everybody getting on the boat and coming to New York. That's right. and making their way in the great America that it is today.
Can we go back? Hold on, just real quick on that. My story will lack. My story will lack in comparison to Barry, especially because I don't have any English.
He's so excited about this. You know how I know he's excited? He interrupts maybe once, twice, 3 at the most.
But I'm on like 4.
Over the course, you want me to clean that out a little bit?
Well, so my story is we go to visit my sister who lives in Dublin. This was several years ago, and I go, well, let's go to a pub. Let's go to a pub. I want to experience, the real Irish life. So we go to this cool pub, and they've got Budweiser on tap, and they're playing Lynyrd Skynyrd on the jukebox. Lynyrd fucking Skynyrd. It wasn't even like the Beatles or U2. Lynyrd fucking Skynyrd. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on all this.
Which, by the way, was the original name of the band.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that. True story.
Lynyrd fucking Skynyrd.
No, not. Now we're gonna pour the Jamesons.
Cooper's Croze.
Cooper's Croze. Tell us a little bit about this one.
So 3 years ago, the Jameson company in the Middleton Distillery in County Cork decided they wanted to create a series that represented the best of the masters in the distillery: the master cooper, the master distiller, and the master blender. 3 of the most important roles in a distillery. And obviously the distiller is responsible for the whole distillation process from start to finish. The blender is responsible for making sure that what ends up in the bottle is the right flavor profile, is the right mix, the right vatting. And the cooper is the man who repairs the barrels. He's the man who's putting the heads on the barrels. He's the man who's fixing any leaks. And in this particular case, the cooper in Middleton Distillery, his name is Ger Buckley. And Ger Buckley is the 5th generation cooper to have worked at the Middleton Distillery. And he uses the same tools to repair barrels that his great-great-grandfather did.
Wow.
So what a Cooper's Croze is, it's an implement that's used to dig the groove into the inside of the staves of a barrel so that you can put the head on the barrel. So that little slot on the top of the barrel, this Croze goes around the inside and chops a hole and slices a hole inside. So this is Ger Buckley's version of what he thinks is the best Irish whiskey. And it's actually been aged in 4 different barrels: Virgin, American Oak, first fill bourbon, second fill bourbon, and then Iberian sherry. And it's an amazing flavor profile, incredibly complex.
Just from the nose, Hansberry, I'm gonna hazard a guess and say you won't find this one nearly as hot. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's Bountiful.
It's Bountiful. Bountiful. You've never used the word bountiful ever.
I'm not even quite sure what it means, honestly.
I find it bountiful.
So, look, that's an interesting description, certainly.
But you can't say I'm incorrect.
Feel free to use that one in one of your presentations, Barry. I think you'll find the Jameson's Cooper's Croze bountiful
aromatically
in its taste and aroma.
I went to the distillery 2 years ago, and they told me that isn't that beautiful?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, you can get the wood. You can definitely get the wood out of that. The oakiness. This is the vanilla that comes out of the.
It's bountiful.
It's very bountiful. Yeah, some might say. One might say.
one might say.
No, that's very, very good. Now, this is available in Ohio.
This is available in Ohio. This is about $80 a bottle.
Well worth it. Well worth it. We always say on Whiskey Business that we strive, because not everybody has the money to go out and buy $80 bottles. So we always
but on St. Pat's Day, maybe
the $50 or less bottles. But
splurge for $80.
You know what? I would pay the $80 for that one for sure.
Of the three in the Maker series, there's Cooper's Croze, Distiller's Safe, and Blender's Dog. This is my favorite. This is by far my favorite.
This is the
Cooper's Croze. And this gets voted one of the favorite whiskeys at all my tastings. So whenever I provide this one, even when it's put up against Redbreast, and you're familiar with Redbreast, which to me is one of the greatest whiskeys to come out of Ireland, this consistently gets voted number one.
It's bountiful.
You got your name for your episode now.
In a previous St. Paddy's podcast, we had our mutual friend Martin from Tullamore, who's no longer in the States. He's back over there, isn't he?
And do you know what he's doing now? He started his own whiskey company.
Did he really?
He did. So you're going to have him back, and he was back in Columbus a few weeks ago for a quick visit.
Maybe he was hired.
He'll let me know next time he comes back, because we had him on the podcast, and we talked about Tullamore.
That's right.
And then he and I, along with Hansberry, went out afterwards.
Oh, I heard about your night.
We closed down
the police told
something.
But we finished off the evening with some Redbreast 12. Yeah.
No better bottle. No better bottle. Yeah.
No better bottle. Is that one of your favorite? I mean, is it possible for you to have a favorite number one choice in the Berry
Desert
Channel?
Island? I think it's going to change over time. Ask me in 2 years, it might be different. But today, if I had one Desert Island bottle, it would be Redbreast 21-year-old. It is.
That seems to pop up in your photos on Instagram quite often as.
It's just insanely good.
I remember one photo, but was it the Redbreast 21? Was that a photo of that it had not been opened, and you were like amazed that no one had had opened up?
That's
that?
Right.
Was it the Redbreast 21?
Yeah.
That had not been opened.
I opened it after that.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, and good for you.
It's amazing,
because that's how I feel about great whiskeys. Yeah. I was like, oh no, we can't open that one. That's what's the point of having it if you're not going to open it at some point and drink it?
Look, I go back to that time when I was 18 years of age, and I was saving up my money for one measure of whiskey. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd afford a bottle. And now that maybe I can afford the bottle, I'm going to drink it. I'm going to enjoy it.
Right.
And for me, it's just a beautiful thing that I can tie it all back to when I first tasted it, and now I can sip on that and I can enjoy it. And it's a lovely thing.
You were recently married. Is your wife a whiskey drinker as well?
I met her at a whiskey tasting.
Oh, okay, there you go. Okay.
I met her at an Irish whiskey tasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's lovely, by the way.
She's lovely, yeah. She's a lovely girl, and she loves whiskey. She loves Irish whiskey.
Does she go to the tastings with you?
Occasionally, yeah. She's heard the spiel over and over again now. She's heard the stories, but she's a great help for setting up and taking pictures.
She's heard the stories of blah blah blah. Yes, you're.
Here he comes with that story again. There we go.
You told it different last time.
That's right. Shut
up. Do you share the same tastes in whiskeys? Or
no, she prefers, actually, she'd be more of a Scotch drinker than anything. She loves a good peated Scotch, and she loves the Irish peated whiskies. There's one called Connemara, which would be her favourite. I'm not a fan of the peated whiskies at all, but that would be her choice. So we're
and is she Irish as well?
No, she's from here. She's from here in Columbus.
Here in Columbus, Ohio, but no Irish descent.
No Irish descent. Scandinavian but no Irish.
No,
none at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now
there we go. Now she's half Irish now. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
She'd love to live over there, and she loves going back there. Yeah.
So she goes with you when you go back. Yeah.
She loves it.
Yeah. And did you think that? I mean, was that your first marriage? Was not your first marriage?
My ninth. No, it wasn't. Dino's face.
The do-overs. The I do do-over. The I do do-over.
No, that's my second. When I first, years ago, 12, 13 years ago, I was married. And
you're married, you're young.
Young. I should have known better, but I didn't.
Well, you might have. It just didn't work out. So big deal.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's training, dress rehearsal for the
for the real
one, for the right one. Yeah, for sure.
That's
I'm a Columbus girl. I'm married a Columbus girl. Fuck yeah, man.
Besties.
I'm keeping an eye on you tonight. I'm keeping an eye on you tonight. Because you've already we're only halfway through the podcast and you're fist bumping. Hey, Columbus girls.
Well, hey.
2 sips in. These anybody's.
Oh man.
So how are you celebrating St. Patrick's Day? Let me ask you.
Well, I was,
There we go.
it's so funny that you kind of brought that up because last year it was on a Saturday.
Yeah.
It was on a Saturday, and I hated it. And let me tell you why. And maybe this is just my.
Because you were slashed by noon.
No. Here's the deal. I love St. Patrick's Day. I love, and I mean this in the most affectionate way possible. I love the struggle. I love it when it's on a weekday. I love the fact that it's on St. Paddy's Day, is on like on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, Thursday, a Monday, whatever the case might be. And the fact that you're going to go out and you're going to do it up because it's St. Paddy's Day, knowing that if you have responsibilities, you have to tend to those responsibilities the next day. I love when that gauntlet is thrown down and I have to, like, no matter what I do
challenge
on St. Paddy's Day, I've got to be on my game the next day.
That's the Dino challenge for sure.
When it's on a Saturday, I can get drunk on any Saturday I choose, knowing that Sunday is Sunday and I'm going to rest and sleep in, whatever might be the case. It's easy.
Now it's on a Sunday this year, though, so that's kind of halfway between.
So a Sunday.
It's a school night.
If it's a school night, you have to be someplace on Monday, in theory. I know some people will take it off, whatever the case might be. But when I was in radio, if St. Patty's fell on a Sunday night, I have to be there Monday. But I would not cheat myself of St. Patty's Day.
See, most people celebrate. If it's on a Sunday, most people celebrate on the Saturday. So this year, everyone's going out on the Saturday.
No, and for the record, Kiss is in town in Columbus on Saturday night.
Well, no, I think that's
I'm
bullshit.
just saying, if you want to go to the Kiss concert and celebrate,
nothing more Irish than that.
Do that. I think you are besmirching the holiday. I'm gonna go out on St. Patty's on Saturday.
But see, I like it that it's on Sunday because I'm able to maybe do like an afternoon little romp.
That's
fine.
Go
from like maybe like 11 to 6 and just.
But no more than 7 hours of drinking.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Do you understand my thought process there?
It's kind of a very Catholic way of thinking. We must make it hard for ourselves. It must be, it's almost like self-immolation. We must make it very hard for ourselves and punish ourselves.
Because especially on a Sunday, you can't celebrate until after you go to Mass. And you're going to go to the Mass early.
Well, when I grew up in Ireland, the pubs were closed on the afternoon of St. Patrick's Day because it was a holy day. Mm-hmm. They weren't allowed to be open. Now, that's changed since we have the separation of church and state, but in Ireland, we didn't drink at all.
I feel you gotta earn it.
You gotta earn it.
You gotta earn it, and then you show up if it's on a Sunday, and it is this year, and you go to work on Monday like, whoo! Last night but here I am. You know what? I survived. I made it. I did it. And but if it's on a Saturday and you got nowhere to be on Sunday, it's like
we need to put a trail of obstacles in front of Dino, so he's got to climb over hurdles, get around trees.
You need to make it a little harder.
Make it hard for him to get to the pub.
You need to have something planned for me on a Sunday after a Saturday St. Patty's Day because I did not do it up last year on St. Patty's Day.
You can make up for it this year.
I'll make up for it this year on a Sunday. What do you got in mind?
I'll talk to you off air.
Do you have someplace I could go on?
There's always somewhere. There'll always be a candle in the window somewhere.
Candle in the window.
I would enjoy that. We'll talk off the air. We'll talk.
Will you have another drop? Will you?
Boy, I'm
pacing yourself.
I would hate to say that I'm torn between the two, but I really do like the Cooper's Croze a little bit better.
Don't doubt your palate.
I feel before you got here, we decided to tease our palates a little bit, but we stayed in the Irish whiskey world. We had some writer's tears,
lovely drop,
which we've had on the podcast
you
before.
Kindly brought to my house last time you visited.
I brought you a bottle of it, but since I brought you that bottle, it is now available here.
That's
in Ohio.
Right. Yeah, that was the first writer's tears I've had over here that you brought to me.
Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it popped up. But I was happy to have brought it to the table.
Yes, that was a lovely drop,
so to speak. We had a wonderful night. I mean, and let's talk about that for a second. What the camaraderie of whiskey brings together. I mean, I have been in bars over the course of my life where people have just gotten just shit-faced drunk and it's gotten ugly.
Yeah.
But there's a certain amount of civility that's also included in the art of drinking whiskey and camaraderie, which brings friends together and stories and experiences.
That's right. Whiskey's for sharing. Whiskey's for telling stories over. It's for bonding. You might be surprised to know that I don't drink whiskey alone in my house. I don't. If I'm drinking whiskey, I'll have friends over. I don't sit there and just sip on a whiskey. I see it as a purely social thing.
A completely social thing?
Yeah, completely social thing.
So you won't have one just by yourself? Why
I would say very rarely, very rarely. My wife and I have talked about this regularly. In many ways, I'm almost happy that I'm not drawn to having a drink. I mean, I've got 80 open bottles on my shelf, you know.
I understand.
So I have a healthy respect for the bottle and for what's in it, but I do see it as a camaraderie and a bonding thing. And I've never been a big drinker. But I appreciate it, and I like appreciating with people and having people tell me what they think and what they like. And there's nothing nicer than telling people a story about this and then hearing how much you like it.
But isn't it interesting what the perception of people might be? I mean, if you go by the handle of Irish Whiskey Barry, you know, and you have 80 open bottles in your home, and
he must be an alcoholic.
There's a bar. You haven't been downstairs yet, but there's a bar downstairs. And there's a bar up here, and there's a bar outside for
got 3 bars in his
the
house.
pond.
Yeah.
And everybody assumes like, oh, that guy just must be tanked 24/7.
Right?
No, not.
Yeah,
you take a couple days off a week.
but I do sometimes drink. I tend to when I'm writing, I tend to pour a glass of a favorite whiskey.
Nothing wrong with that.
While I'm writing.
Yeah. I see you've got a Hemingway quote over there. Right drunk, edit sober.
Right drunk, edit sober.
Yeah.
He wasn't too far off. There have been times where, edit sober for sure, because sometimes when she write drunk, it's like, what the fuck is this?
I know.
Yeah. But but you know, to sit alone and drink till I was drunk, no, that would seem like a lost venture.
Well, we've always said in Ireland, you drink for 2 reasons. You either drink to remember or you drink to forget. You know, and it's I don't know, it's an interesting. Ireland obviously has had its problems with alcoholism and still does, and it's a terrible part of our history.
Is it a part of your history, or is it part of the stereotype?
No, it's absolutely part of the culture in Ireland. It revolves around the pub, for good or bad. There are very good aspects of the community that's built up by having a pub as that central point. But because you're in a pub, you couldn't order a Coke. You'd have to order a pint. You'd have to order a whiskey, and that's not a great thing. And look, the Irish have never been big sharers about their emotions. If they're struggling with things, it was just push it down inside you, have a few drinks, you'd be grand.
Were your parents like that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was always, alcohol was never just, you couldn't have, for many of my parents' generation, and a lot of mine too, alcohol is not seen as just a social thing. It's seen as a thing to either get a bit of courage or forget about things you don't want to remember.
It was a solution.
Yeah, which is never a good thing. And so there have been a lot of issues with that, as you'd imagine, but I think there's a big social focus now on drinking better, not drinking more. Like, let's learn about where our drinks come from. Let's understand the impact it can have. Let's not drink more. Let's just drink better. And I think that's a preferable approach.
Were your parents big drinkers?
Yeah, my dad was a big drinker for many, many years. And it got the better of him. You know, he had to give it up and dry out. And I mean, he could have been killed many times because of his alcoholism.
Because of how much he drank, or because of what happened after he drank?
Getting into a car with, drinking. He could have killed himself, could have killed other people, or he could have just drank himself to death. He could have choked on his own vomit. Awful. Drinks a curse.
And you say he dried out.
He dried out. Yeah.
And he stopped drinking.
He stopped drinking.
How hard was that for him?
Very hard, I think. Again, he grew up in a home where emotions weren't talked about, and so he lost his father when he was 10 years of age. He saw like things that children shouldn't see when they're young, poor, poverty-stricken Ireland back in the 40s and 50s, and he lived through that. There was nobody to talk to, and he went to sea. He was at sea for many years, and there it was all about drinking, and it wasn't a very empathetic environment to people's feelings and emotions, and so I think alcohol was always the cure, and so I think that got the better of him. And he just when he retired from ships, he had nothing to do. Sure, he'd have a drink, and then another one. Before you know it, sure, he's 3 sheets to the wind. And
what I'm kind of curious if you can share it. What there's always seems to be, for those that stop, Mm-hmm. There always seems to be a hit bottom moment where they say, "That's it, I'm done."
Yeah.
If they have the courage and the ability to do so. Do you know what it was for your father?
Yeah, the choice between seeing his kids again or seeing alcohol again, and once we dried him out, like we literally sat on him. My sister and I sat on him.
Really?
For 3 days until the alcohol left his system, and then let him consider that proposal a little bit more sober than when he started.
How old are you when this sitting upon your father occurred?
This was 6 years ago. 7 years ago.
So recently.
This is very recently.
So your father's still alive?
Still alive, healthier than ever. He's 72 years of age. He climbs mountains 3 times a week.
Holy shit.
He leads groups of 30, 40 youngsters up mountains. He's the first up, the first down. He left alcohol behind him, and he realizes that there was a better life out there. But he was on ships for so long, he didn't realize there was another world out there. Like, he could climb a mountain, he could meet people, he could talk to people. They were there. He just needed to know that there was somebody there to talk to. Maybe for years he hadn't known that, so the demons get pushed inside.
So someone like that, does he lecture? Would he tell you, like, it's evil? Look, I can tell you stories of what it did to me, or will he leave you to make your own decisions?
No, he'll leave me to make my own decisions, but you can imagine the challenge now when his son is in the whiskey business.
Right.
And last time I was home, I was a full day in the Middleton distillery doing an episode of Stories and Sips, and then I met him for dinner in Middleton outside the distillery. I could have invited him in there, but I didn't want to bring him back in and tempt him with that. And so we met afterwards, and he didn't ask me much about it, but he wasn't also saying, "Hey, watch out for the demon." I think he knows what I've seen.
And do you think he's tempted still?
I don't think he's tempted. No,
you don't
know.
No, I don't think that ever leaves.
He's
an alcoholic who.
Oh yeah, you're always an alcoholic.
You're always an alcoholic. If you're a compulsive gambler and you've quit gambling, you still get the taste to want to make a bet.
But it seems like you've bucked that a little bit. It sounds like, if you got 80 bottles at home and you're
gotcha. Look, when you're a child and you see that, when you're growing up, you always worry that that's going to be you.
Yeah.
Maybe it skips a generation, or I don't know what happens. But
was that part of it for you?
Oh, it was. Fear. I didn't drink.
We go back to what you said earlier. You didn't have your first drink till you were 18.
Yeah.
Was it watching your father that said? Because sometimes it goes one of two ways. Either you see your father drink and you want and you say you check it off, and my father drank, I'll drink. Or you see some of the ugly and you're like, I don't want to be that way.
It was probably more the latter, and I probably made subconscious decisions to avoid it. I'd seen maybe its impact and didn't like it, and so I think I remember I tried my first drink at 18, but I went off it then for years after that. I think it was 21 before I had another drink. So I was 18, 19, I had a couple of drinks, then I went off it for 2 years, and then 21 I had a beer, and then, but I've always had this awareness or worry, well, what if I have 3? Will I want to have 30? And luckily I've never needed that, but the people closest to me in my life I would always say, if I ever look like I'm having one too many, be the first to tell me rather than me find out, like the hard way. But yeah, no, I have no. I could go for months without a drink, and I have no issue with it.
No issue whatsoever.
I could be in the whiskey business for the next 20 years and never sip a whiskey, and I'll be fine.
A drink at 18, not again until 21.
Yeah.
All I remember is losing my virginity at 14 years of age, and then not having the opportunity to have sex again until I was 18, and I missed it over the course of those 3-4 years. So it's interesting that you had a drink at 18, but didn't have any desire to have it again at 21. And I mentioned your mother. She's still living as well?
Still living.
And did she drink?
I think she drank at maybe acceptable Irish levels, whether that's...
What's an acceptable Irish level? No,
I think that
equal to, less than Italian.
I think that the culture my parents grew up in was one where alcohol was an essential, integral part of the day-to-day existence. To get to the next day, you might need something. Life was not easy for my parents growing up, and I don't think there was any mechanism in place in Ireland to help them deal with it, to deal with life, to deal with the tragedies of their lives, the poverty of their lives. Nothing existed to help them think about that except alcohol.
Has that shaped you?
100% it's shaped me. Absolutely.
Influenced you?
Oh, 100%.
And how you live, and
yes,
and
absolutely.
how you work, and
yes,
and how you feel about
100%.
life. Because I come back to being 40 again, and and you're looking down the road at 40 years of age.
Yeah.
What do you see? What do you see for the next 10 to 20 years for Barry Chandler? What do you hope to attain?
It's a big question.
I know it's a huge question.
I come back to this idea of headspace and thinking time. I come from a country where we're not busy every day. Now, some of that leads to you put a pint in your hand, But I look at it the other way. I want not to be busy so that I could consider things, so that I can think about things. Mm-hmm. I would like to sit on a pier overlooking the water somewhere with a notebook, and I'd like to write a poem. I'd like to just think, I don't want to be busy. And in the American culture, if you say if somebody asks you how are you and you say I'm quiet, they almost look at you like you've lost a family member.
Right.
And I say, no, I've designed my life to be a little bit more quiet. And they're like, I'm sorry to hear that. No, I've chosen quiet.
It's a choice.
Yeah, so I don't want to be busy for my whole life. Getting back into Irish whiskey, strangely, has allowed me to connect with what's important. I've met the most incredible community of people in Ireland through Twitter and Instagram, who've connected with me, who I've had phone calls with, I have video calls with. I've gone and meet them in Ireland. We've had the most heartfelt conversations about life and love and whiskey and everything in between, and that has come as a result of me reacquainting myself with this devil drink. It's
the devil drink, yeah.
Which is a funny, what an ironic thing, that I would use alcohol to improve my life and to build deeper connections.
It's the tools that you have at your disposal and how you use those tools. If you've got an axe, you can cut down a tree, or you can kill somebody.
Right.
It's what you decide to do.
We've all seen The Shining.
It's all what you decide to do with the tools and how you use them. I mean, I find you to be a very interesting and fascinating kind of guy. We've texted privately. I'm 20 years your senior. In theory, you could be my son if I would have.
Yeah.
Well, no.
If you'd managed to find that second girl, was it?
But in our texting, I think I don't care what age you are, whether I'm sure there's certain things in life and experiences at 60 that I could share with you that you would say, I never thought about that.
Right.
But it's interesting that at your life experiences at 40, based on your childhood and what you grew up with, there are things that you can share and influence me as well. And I think that's an incredible thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when you were at my house and you were sharing some amazing stories of some things you've done, and like even we got very topical at the moment, but we got talking about Lady Gaga somehow, and you pulled out a photograph of your daughter in New York.
My daughter in New York with Lady Gaga, in her lap.
Yeah. And boy, we never know when we meet somebody how they've lived, and many have lived, and to be able to, I think this is I said this to you the first time we did this. You have an uncanny ability to extract things out of people, and I think what a gift that is, that there's so many people out there that we could learn from, and that you have this ability to extract things from them. It's we never know what people are going through. We never know what they've gone through or what their hopes or dreams are. And I think this kind of a medium and this kind of a format is good for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but I consider these podcasts and the conversations that we have to be adventures. I don't do a whole lot of prep for these things. I have one or two or three questions. I want this podcast to be just as intriguing to me and interesting, and as it is to the people who are. I want to hear things for the first time as well. I don't want to know the answers ahead of time. I don't want a list of questions that I know how you're going to answer and what the case might be. I want it to be an experience for me as well, and I think there's a certain amount of adventure and sincerity in that otherwise would be lost if I knew all the answers ahead of time.
So what have been? So you've now 90 episodes or 80 episodes?
Well, we've had 80 bottles. We've
80
had
bottles.
more episodes because some of our podcasts have been two-parters, and we've had some what we call whiskey shots. That little fillers when we didn't have a full podcast in any given week. But we've had close to 100 or so podcast since we started.
Yeah.
But
so how has life? How has that affected your life? How is it beyond the logistical setting up and recording and releasing and editing? What have you taken out of this that suddenly you've had this aha, boy, that has all culminated in me now having this insight? Have you had any of those?
Aside him having to buy more liquor for me.
Boy, this thing's expensive.
Yeah.
It's an expensive podcast. I'll say that much. No, we're in our second or third year with this Hansberry, 2.5.
We're rolling 4, even. Yeah,
maybe 3. Okay, I've lost track. What you said earlier about being able to extract things out of people, I don't know if that's a skill, a gift, whatever the case might be. I just find it very fascinating and interesting, and I'm happy that I'm able to do it because I learn from other people. Anybody who says, "There's nothing you can teach me," I'm 60 years old, bullshit. Yeah. I think there's so many things out there that are still yet to be discovered and learned. And I guess that's my big takeaway from this podcast, is that I sit down and I talk to people and I find out things about their lives that can unconsciously maybe influence mine in a way to make you think. You hear the old cliche, there's always somebody who has it worse than you, and there's somebody that has it better than you, whatever the case might be. And sometimes you find out that people are the same as you. They have some of the same fears and some of the same woes and troubles. And that's what I find interesting about this podcast. Our guests have run from A to Z. One of my favorite podcasts here was one called Matt and Alcoholic, where the guest bottle was no bottle. And he was a friend of mine who I did not know was an alcoholic until he had hit that bottom rung in life, and he shared that openly and honestly from start to finish, and I found it fascinating and heartbreaking. And I think that's my takeaway from this, that I can still learn things about people and have the opportunity to share them with folks as well.
Such diverse conversations.
Yeah. So thank you for being one of those people tonight. Like I said, when I mentioned earlier in the podcast about the do-over, we talked about StoryForge, which is a very successful company, and God bless, continued success with all of that. But I wanted to get a little deeper into Barry Chandler.
I think you shocked me the first time, because we went relatively deep, I would say, the first time round.
Yeah.
And we were on a stage at
and it wasn't the most intimate atmosphere. And I said, I got to get him here in my house.
Yeah.
Where we can just talk a little bit more in depth and have some fun. And I'll be honest with you, when you said, I'll bring the whiskey, I went, yay. Because I knew
an Irishman who's in the whiskey business can't bring the whiskey. There's something wrong.
Yeah, for sure. So let's find out how people can find you as well on Instagram and all the other social media outlets.
So you can find me on Instagram, Irish Whiskey Barry.
No stereotype included there.
No stereotype.
No.
I don't have any pictures of potatoes, just whiskey. You can go to storiesandsips.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Irish Whiskey BC, and Facebook.com/storiesandsips.
Yep.
Love to connect.
And StoryForge?
StoryForge.co website, and our Facebook. You can search for StoryForge on Facebook and find us there as well.
Okay.
So anything related to stories, you'll find Barry attached to it somehow.
The guest bottles have been Powers, the 3 Swallow release. Am I getting a good shot of that, John Whitney? All right. And the Jameson Cooper's Croze, which is my favorite out of the 2. Thank you, Barry Chandler, for bringing the bottles. Whiskey, Hansberry, am I forgetting something?
Yep,
You got
everything.
You're holding something. Everything?
Well, we gave all the business at the front.
Okay.
And we're going to give all the business at the
all
back.
of it?
Well, yeah.
All right.
Well,
go ahead.
I'll
go
go
ahead.
through it quickly.
Go ahead.
Whiskey Business, of course, is on YouTube. On edited episodes and bonus behind the bottle shorts. Search for Whiskey Business. with Dino Tripodis.
Check out. I'm going to compare. I'm going to compare your listing of these things now as you did in the beginning.
Did he have a drink?
I got something in my throat. I think I swallowed a frog along the way.
160 proof, isn't it? You're drinking.
Go on.
But guess what? We are newly on Twitter at Whiskey Biz Show. Find us on Instagram, Whiskey Business Podcast. Like us on Facebook, please. Come find us. We got a bunch of stuff there. Rate and review us when you subscribe us on iTunes. We love you there. And just subscribe on your favorite podcast. If you find us, subscribe and say thank you.
All right. I do want to ask one more thing of you before we go. And I was reluctant to even put this on the podcast. Today's been a sad day for me. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I have a cousin who, by the time you see this podcast, people, he will have passed. He's 1 year older than me. 1 year older than me, and had some misfortunes along the way with his health that led to his demise. I still haven't gotten the official word on it, but is there anything in your Irish heritage toast to those departed that maybe we can put on this podcast that would be for my cousin Tommy, that something in his name and for lack of a better word, his honor that would last, that maybe once on the internets would last forever. So if you got something like that, I would like to impose upon you to share something, if you would, please.
It's sorry to hear of your trouble and poor Tommy, but as he goes on his next journey, may the road rise to meet him. May the wind always be at his back, and may he be in heaven a half hour before the devil knows he's passed.
There you go. For you, Tommy.
Tommy.
Whiskey Business, my friends, is a Never the Luck production, produced with the wonderful help of John Whitney on our YouTube channel, and of course the incomparable and bountiful Greg Hansberry. My name is Dino Tripodis, and until, what do you got there, Johnny? Oh yeah, there you go, with a cat. Nice. So until the next bottle,